It began not with a clash of swords or the roar of an invading army, but with a quiet breath, a flickering lamp, and a dagger drawn in the dark. History, as it often does, pivoted not on a battlefield but in the narrow corridors of power. The man who would die that night was no mere official. He was a titan of empire, a figure upon whose shoulders rested the weight of a nation, and his fall would send ripples through centuries. No one expected the blow to come from within. Yet behind palaced walls and polished marble columns, envy sharpened its edge, cloaked in whispers and sealed with blood. His name was Philip II of Math, a king, a conqueror, and the father of a boy who would soon become a god among men. But before Alexander earned the title of the Great, he was simply a son robbed of a father. He united the warring city-states of Greece not through diplomacy alone, but with cunning strategy in the bite of steel, a dangerous man to love or to betray. There was no omen in the sky, no shadow cast long enough to warn him, but the wheels of conspiracy had been turning for months, maybe years. Perhaps he believed he was untouchable. Perhaps he believed fear was enough protection. His daughter's wedding was being celebrated, and all of Macedon had gathered in grandeur. Dignitaries, nobles, generals, every face that mattered in his kingdom was present. Philip's reign had been one of brilliance and brutality, and yet betray him they did. A bodyguard, a lover once, and a man spurned by the very court he had served. The theater turned into chaos, a maelstrom of horror and disbelief. And in that moment, a kingdom held its breath, watching as the architect of Macedonian supremacy bled into the earth. His blade found the king's chest with ruthless precision. On the day of his assassination, the sun rose like any other over Egypt, because murder, especially royal murder, is never just a single man's crime. Philip strode into the theater, cloaked in victory, a woman of ruthless ambition. Her love for her son knew no boundary, and her hatred for her rivals no limit. With Philip gone, her son, Alexander, stood poised to inherit it all, except one. With his father gone, Alexander inherited not just a kingdom, but a mission. The planned invasion of Persia, the burning ambition of empire, the desire to eclipse his father's legacy. His bodyguards, oddly absent, did not surround him. A deliberate absence, or a stroke of hubris. To this day scholars argue, was the young prince truly unaware of the plot that would clear his path to the throne? But fear, unlike loyalty, vanishes when power seems within reach. As he walked between the columns, a man darted forward, Pausanias, but with blood still drying on the marble, he silenced them swiftly and without mercy. And perhaps, in doing so, history would have known a different empire, a different hero, and a different world. Philip fell, not in battle, but on stone. Panic erupted. Shouts rang out. But his empire, unlike his father's, lacked roots. Philip's murder did not just crown a new king. It changed the trajectory of East and West forever. A time when Greek culture spread like wildfire across continents, carried not by scholars, but by soldiers. But the story doesn't end there. Not with the body, not even with the funeral pyre. A future unrecognizable. All altered by a blade in the ribs of a king. Pausanias was chased down and killed almost immediately. Too quickly, some would say. Before he could speak, before he could name names, and names there were. Many believed Olympias Philip's wife had guided the blade. Philip's ghost lingered in every campaign, in every siege. Centuries later, Roman emperors, Byzantine kings, and Ottoman sultans would all learn this lesson. A single moment of violence that reached across the centuries, reshaping civilizations. Was Alexander trying to fulfill his father's dream or bury it? The world might have known a stable Macedon rather than a sprawling, short-lived empire. Would Rome have ever risen as it did, inheriting Alexander's dream? Would Christianity have found a different path through history? Others pointed fingers at Antipater, the regent, or even at Alexander himself. History tends to silence its darkest whispers beneath marble and myth. Philip had made many enemies, inside and outside his palace, yet the consequences of Philip's death were immediate and colossal. Her presence had threatened Olympia. Her child might have replaced Alexander in the line of succession. Had Philip lived, he may have led that invasion himself. Philip became the tragic genius, Alexander the divine conqueror, and if whispers are to be believed, she did far more than whisper. Some claimed she placed a golden crown upon Pausanias' corpse, reduced to a footnote, his reasons buried beneath layers of suspicion. But fate had chosen otherwise. Alexander, barely 20, took the reins of an empire now teetering on the edge. Some doubted him, others plotted against him. Philip's generals, his allies, even his enemies in Persia, they all gained or lost in the power vacuum that followed. He claimed the throne not with hesitation, but with fire. And yet, the shadow of that assassination followed him for years, or a visionary cut short before his time. And what if he had lived one more year? In the philosophies carried eastward, in the legends of a young man who became a myth too soon, the Persian Empire crumbled under his charge. From Asia Minor to the banks of the Indus, Alexander carved a path of devastation and wonder. Philip had been a builder, Alexander a storm. And that storm may never have risen had a single dagger not struck true. That is the cruel poetry of history, how the fall of one man creates a chasm that others rush to fill. The death of one Macedonian king gave birth to the Hellenistic age. Imagine it: no Alexander, no spread of Greek language through Asia, no Alexandria in Egypt, no fusion of East and West in the ancient world. And yet, even now, the true motives behind that ancient murder remain obscured by time. Was it vengeance, politics, a mother's ambition, or simply the unquenchable fire of power, always hungry for more? Philip's assassination became the template for royal danger, where proximity to power meant either protection or peril. But Philip was among the first to fall this way, and perhaps the one whose fall mattered most, because without his death, Alexander might have remained a prince in waiting, forever in his father's shadow, gone never to be born. What makes this murder extraordinary is not the brutality, it is the transformation it triggered. Had Pausanias missed his mark by an inch, would the Parthenon still be the center of culture? Such is the butterfly effect of blood, and as with all moments that redefined the world, the story was quickly written. But no murder happens in a vacuum. The court of Macedon was a pit of snakes, where allegiance changed with the wind and love could curdle into vendetta. He'd humiliated nobles, discarded lovers, and married a new wife, young, beautiful, and dangerously well. The stakes were nothing short of dynastic extinction. For Olympias, the math was simple: remove the father, secure the son. A silent nod of approval, a promise fulfilled. But even if she did orchestrate it, she wasn't the only one to benefit. And as Alexander set off to carve his legend into the bones of the earth, those who remembered that day in Asia knew one thing: the world they once knew had ended. A new one was being born in fire, ambition, and the echo of an ancient murder. Even centuries later, that echo still resonates in the architecture of Alexandria. And yet, the man who made it all possible, the one who did, was he a tyrant who earned his fate? Would Alexander still have risen? Or would the world we know now look entirely, hauntingly different? The world tilted on its axis the moment Philip's blood stained those marble stones. In the flicker of an assassin's blade, centuries of plans and ambitions lay shattered, only to be reborn in a new, more furious shape. Grief drove him, but so did something darker, a fierce, unyielding hunger to prove himself worthy of a legacy now stained with treachery. The very alliances Philip had forged teetered on the brink as opportunists plotted to reclaim freedom or carve out kingdoms of their own. Alexander felt the tremor of his father's death ripple through every chamber of his soul. Darius had long mocked Philip's designs until that day, when a new Macedonian king, barely 20, seized the reins of an empire built on conquest. Across Greece, whispers morphed into roars. City-states long cowed by Macedon dared murmur of revolt. But Alexander moved faster than rumor. He marshaled his veteran generals, quelled dissent with iron resolve, and presented himself to his people as both son and successor, grieving but unbroken. Some believed that without Philip's seasoned hand, Alexander would falter. His resolve was Herculean, born of a wound too raw, too soothed, too deep to forget. Others feared his boundless ambition, sharpened now by blood and destiny. In every city he took, he left not only soldiers, but scholars, Greek artisans, thinkers, and priests who would seed Hellenic ideas across the ancient world. The local priests found themselves teaching Plato to Persian nobles, as much out of curiosity as caution. Meanwhile, far to the east, the vast Persian Empire watched with wary eyes. But while Philip built alliances, Alexander forged fusion, marrying princesses of conquered lands to his officers, blending rituals, and adopting local customs. In Babylon's grand halls, courtiers debated, was this youth a threat or a pawn? She reminded Alexander that her power, like blood, was woven into the very soil of their homeland. Yet beneath the courtesy lay a growing distance, a sense that he was no longer her boy, but a god walking in mortal guise. By the time Alexander's army reached Asia Minor's shores, he had already stamped his authority. King Pyrrhus, mounted on an elephant, embodied the raw, untamed spirit of resistance. Yet everywhere he went, people spoke of his father's death as though it were yesterday, an omen that had ignited this whirlwind of conquest. Sometimes he awoke with a start, imagining Pausanias' dagger at his own throat. But dawn found him hardened, resolute to shape that fate, not be shaped by it. In Persepolis, he drank from the royal cup of kings long fallen. He burned the heart of the Persian throne in gesture, both symbolic and ruthless, a tribute to vengeance, and a warning to any who might betray him. His men fought with the ferocity of those who believe their cause is just as if they were defending Philip's honor, rather than chasing Persian gold. Homesickness gnawed. The memory of Philip's measured rule haunted even their dreams. Siege after siege, city after city, he hurled himself at the Persian forces, as though they were but shadows of his father as enemies. Desert winds thirsted for the blood of exhausted men. Storms threatened to drown ships heavy with spoils. Hellenistic culture bloomed in bazaars from Bactria to Babylon, as though seeded by Philip's legacy. yet bursting into bloom under Alexander's hand. He pressed on, driven by a vision of a world united under a scepter, a dream conceived in the blood-stained foyer of Macedon. The echoes of marble halls, of laughter cut short, of a dagger's fatal arc. Each victory was a message. The dagger had not weakened, Macedon neat had unleashed a tempest. In the plains of Granicus, under a sky heavy with dust and fate, Alexander first tasted true command. He needed allies, not martyrs. A lesson in power Philip might have taught, but delivered with Alexander's own flair. When Darius fled before him, the young king's heart pounded not with triumph alone, but with a fierce, ancestral echo. Yet the conquest was not merely military. Alexander understood the power of culture. In the deserts of Syria, among the ruins of empires older than memory, Greek language took root like a stubborn weed. It was as though Philip's ambition had been compressed into Alexander's youth, then detonated across continents. Babylon welcomed him as liberator, yet every triumph carried its shadow. As Alexander pushed farther east, into the Indus Valley's bewildering jungles, his soldiers' loyalty wore thin. Back in Macedon, Olympias wove her own web. Letters arrived, dripping with flattery and threats. Occasionally, he paused to write her back. Assurances of devotion, carefully toned. In Antioch, artists sculpted his likeness youthful, crowned with laurels, eyes steady with ambition. In Alexandria, scholars pored over texts, seeking a blueprint for a world beyond empire. Back in Greece, however, the old guard watched with wary eyes. The memory of Philip's cautious strategy seemed prudent compared to Alexander's relentless thrust. Arguments flared in the agora. Had Macedon become nothing more than a launching pad for one man's hubris? Had the dagger freed or doomed them? Meanwhile, Olympias nursed her own secrets. She held court in Pydna, weaving alliances that might survive Alexander or outlast him. Her power lay not in armies, but in blood ties. Others stayed behind, content that Macedon bore no quarrel with the East. And blood remembers, as Alexander's fleet rounded Crete, laden with elephant tusks, silks, and scrolls from India, he sent messages back, invitations to join his vision, promises of honor, wealth, and glory. But the murder blurred every boundary, merging continents in a feverish dream of unity. Generals, once brothers in arms, eyed each other with suspicion. Satraps whispered of independence. Some answered and arrived to find a king who wore conquest like a second skin. The triumphs of a decade had aged him beyond his years. The ghost of Philip haunted every alcove of the palace, reminding him that power is as fragile as life itself. Or a merchant in Bactria trading Athenian olive oil for Indian spices. "To whom does my empire belong?" he asked, voice low with fever and foresight. But the world Alexander had reshaped from the Nile's mouth to the Indus banks would never be the same. Trade routes blossomed, ideas mingled, faiths entwined. Imagine a scholar in Petunia, in Egypt's new library, reading Hindu epics in Greek translation. A world without Philip's murder might have seen slower change, kingdoms rising and falling like tides. Centuries of expectation coalesced into that single, fateful exhale. And yet, within that dream lay the seeds of discord. Alexander, who had once walked rivers and deserts with his men, found himself adrift in courtly intrigues he had once scorned. The scaffold he built for a united realm trembled under its own weight of ambition, of culture, of faiths too disparate to bind with mere decrees. By the time he reached Babylon, his health was failing. In his final days, Alexander summoned his closest confidants. Silence answered him, every man wary of the blade that once decided kings. Some say he tried to name a successor. Others whisper that he intended no successor, that his vision was his alone, and would die with him. When he finally breathed his last, the world held its collective breath once more. And then the wars of the Diadochi began. Macedonia's generals carving kingdoms from the body of an empire that had no true heir. But on moments of quiet violence, on a king's last breath, on a conspirator's hand, on the echo that follows, the dream of unity shattered, splintered into Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Persia, and Greco-Bactrian realms that would war for decades. It lives on in every crossroads of culture, in every city whose name echoes Greek, Caesarea Bernice, yet even in ruin, Alexander's vision endured. The very fractures he created fostered new blends of culture, Greek temples alongside Buddhists, Persian courts echoing with Athenian rhetoric. Philip's murder had set all this in motion. The rise, the reign, and the collapse that begot rebirth. So the blade that struck in Egypt did more than kill a king. It unleashed centuries of change, of conquest and creation, of destruction and renewal. And still, the modern world carries its mark. Our alphabets, our sciences, even our conceptions of heroism owe a debt to that single, blood-stained night. What if Pausanias had hesitated? What if Philip had seen the glint of steel and turned in time? Then the tapestry of history would have been woven in different colors. No Alexandria as center of learning, no spread of Hellenism into Asia, perhaps no Roman Empire the way we know it, or from one dagger's thrust. The story does not end with the death of Alexander or the collapse of his empire. It lives on in our maps, the languages we speak, and the very idea that a single mortal can change the course of the world. So as you walk through museums, gaze upon ruins, or study the pages of an ancient manuscript, remember the dagger in the dark. Remember that history's greatest shifts often hinge not on grand armies. And know this, the next time you ponder how one life can change everything, think of Adaya. You will find the blueprint of power and the blueprint of possibility. The dagger's echo reaches down through every age, weaving through the tapestry of empires yet unborn. In medieval halls, knights spoke of Alexander as both saint and his deeds cloaked in myth, yet all traced back to that single act of a spark in eagle-lit candles and oaken. In the courts of Charlemagne, scholars dusty with vellum pondered Hellenic texts. Their Latin quills, guided by the ripple Philip's death had sent westward. Platonic academies reopened, their curricula a bridge from ancient Athens across time, and space bridges built upon Alexander's conquests, which only existed thanks to Philip's demise. All because the Hellenistic world had fractured, scattering seeds far and wide. Even Voltaire mused that the fate of Europe and perhaps the world rested on a blade as swift arc in a distant theater. When the Ottoman crescent rose over Byzantium stones, its architects knew little of Macedon's kings but trade routes, city grids, even tactics of siege bore a Greek fingerprint. Yet his ultimate folly mirrored Philip's vulnerability. Power ungirded by unity fractures as surely as marble does under a sword. As Renaissance masters, dusting off manuscripts in Florence and Venice, unearthed treatises once hidden beneath Persian scrolls. Each generation re-examines the evidence, yet the truth remains elusive, hidden in the ephemeral haze of memory. In the New World, conquistadors carried a thirst for glory forged on stories of Alexander's march to the horizon. Therapists trace patterns from Macedon to modern family dynasties, linking grief to greatness and to ruin. Poets craft sonnets to the fallen king. Novelists weave speculative fictions of conspiracies more tangled than any Silk Road. The murder becomes myth, and myth becomes a mirror reflecting our own questions about loyalty and ambition. They marched across unfamiliar seas, convinced that empire was their destiny, unaware their vision was born of an elder king's blood. Each film reimagines that fateful night. Some blame the mother, others the son, and some, the insatiable thirst for power that courses through human veins. By the age of reason, philosophers looked back on the great and the murdered, debating whether might or morality should steer a nation's helm. A cautionary tale wrapped in dazzling triumphs, showing that conquest never ends with foreign foes alone. Under protective glass, tourists whisper of Pausanias's dagger, marveling at how blood sears itself into even the most silent relic. The blade may change hands, but the thirst for influence never dies. Grow fast, seize markets, but maintain structures lest a single misstep tear the enterprise apart. Each artifact whispers of origins in that blood-soaked theater, a reminder that stone and metal carry memory. Yet educators strive to convey nuance. The interplay of personal vendettas and grand strategy, of flesh and blood motives and the sweep of destiny. They experience a simulation of the scream that reverberated, a visceral echo across millennia. Engineers joke of Philip's ghost. Whenever a telescope breaks or a life support valve fails, reminders that the smallest fault can doom the grandest endeavor. Strategy texts still open with Philip's policies and his demise. Modern conspiracies draw parallels, imagining if a single bullet in Sarajevo had produced Hellenistic ripples in 1914 as a dagger deed in 336 BCE. Napoleon, gazing at Egypt's dunes, saw himself as the heir to Alexander, a man reborn to sweep away decayed orders. In modern archaeology, digs at Ija unearthed fragments of the theater's floor, crumbled stones stained with centuries of rain. Power vacuums, spring surprises, and the successors often bear less wisdom than the predecessors. It asks each of us, what cost are we willing to pay for power, for legacy, for the chance to shape the world? Decisive moment, and in its currents, the blade still glitters. Scholars map webs from Julius Caesar to Archduke Ferdinand, from Lincoln to Gandhi, a lineage begun by Pausanias's thrust. We inherit their triumphs and their tragedies, their visions and their hubris. Historians debate motives still. Was Pausanias driven by spurned love, by political idealism, or by the whisper of Olympias in his ear? Literature, too, finds endless fascination in that night. In psychology, the Philip complex describes how children react when a towering parent is removed to soon ambition untempered by guidance, a hunger that cannot be sated. Military academies teach the Macedonian lesson. Unite fiercely, strike decisively, but beware the rot within your own walls. In boardrooms, executives invoke Alexander as inspiration and Philip as warning. Cinema has cast Philip's story in countless lights: the brooding king, the usurped father, the indifferent conqueror. Even space missions bear the name Alexander, a testament to the enduring allure of reaching beyond known frontiers. In our own time, as we navigate geopolitical shifts and seek unity across cultures, the ancient murder warns us. The removal of a single figurehead can birth movements both radiant and ruinous. Philosophers ask, could a world without dynasties, without singular kings avoid such cataclysms? Yet history shows that ambition finds a way, whether crowned or concealed. Our museums display relics of the Hellenistic age, coins stamped with Alexander's visage, busts of philosophers who walked the Lyceum he inspired. In classrooms, children learn of the Battle of the Blades, a simplistic moniker for the murder that reshaped continents. Technology now allows virtual reconstructions of EJ's theater. Users stroll its rows in VR, pausing at the spot where Philip's heart stilled. Social media hashtags like hashtag Philip's Lane and hashtag echoes of AEGAE trend whenever political assassination. The ripples of EJ reached into the heart of Rome, where senators whispered of regicide as both instrument and omen. Julius Caesar himself, crowned in the Senate's shadow, could not escape the echo of Philip's fall, nor the blade that loomed behind every friend's back. Their illuminated manuscripts bound blood and redemption in gilded script, proof that violence births theology as much as tragedy. In the catacombs beneath Byzantium's stones, monks dared to debate the nature of martyrdom and tyranny, drawing parallels between Christ's sacrifice and Philip's death. The iron stirrup and the falconer's flight merged Western siegecraft with Eastern speed, a hybrid war forged in the memory of a murdered king. When the Mongol horses thundered across Asia, their khans carried scrolls of Greek tactics, learned from envoys who traced lineage back to Alexander's campaign. Princes learned that proximity to power was a knife's length from extinction, training their guards in silent signals and poisoned goblets, fearful of history repeating itself. Print presses groaned under the weight of pamphlets heralding the necessitant. In the courts of Persia's later dynasties, the phrase "as swift as Pausanias" became code for betrayal. They built railways that sliced continents, only to discover that worker uprisings follow the same pattern as palace copes: restless, unpredictable, devastating. During Europe's Reformation, pamphleteers likened the church's hierarchy to Macedonian courts, accusing prelates of conspiracies that mirrored Olympias's whispered intrigues. Their plays, staged by candlelight, cast long shadows, teaching audiences that a kingdom's fall begins with a whisper in the dark. Yet they also feared the undermined trench's subterranean dagger that mirrored the betrayal Philip never saw until it was too late. They treated veterans as inheritors of an ancient wound, searching for healing amid the battle-scarred psyche of nations. Yet their logs noted the winds of fate as fickle as a bodyguard's loyalty, reminding captains that a single mutiny could shatter flotillas as sure as a dagger split bone. Seafarers on the age of sail invoked Alexander in their charts, naming capes and bays after Hellenic heroes. Audiences cheered and wept at the spectacle of destiny rewritten by steel. Power, they concluded, demands not only vision but also guardianship against the knife at your back. In salons of the Enlightenment, women of letters penned tragedies, starring Philip as anguished tyrant and Pausanias as fate's reluctant instrument. Their melodies carry the secret pulse of ambition and the dissonance of trusts. Each newly discovered ruin speaks to the brutality of settlement and the silent complicitance of stone stained with blood. When industrial smokestacks rose, factory owners studied Alexander's supply trains, calculating logistics on maps stained with oil and ambition. Each rocket's launchpad echoes with the chant that greatness demands risk and that risk always carries the sting of the unforeseen. They study how Philip's empire held for decades, yet collapsed the moment unity dissolved from within. Their followers debate who among the avatars is the next boss, fueling fascination with betrayal as both caution and entertainment. In the trenches of World War I, generals charted maneuvers in chalk dust, tracing the grand arcs of hell. Yet they modeled governance boards to avoid Philip's trap, scattering power so no lone hand can wield lethal influence. They warn young athletes, trust must be earned daily, for the snare of envy can sever even the strongest team's spine. Yet they hedge against Pausanias' risks, drafting clauses and covenants to protect against betrayals in rapid-fire equity rounds. After the Great Wars, psychoanalysts coined the ego trauma, exploring how sudden loss of leadership shatters collective identity. They bind committees, not just with vision, but with structures that outlast the thrill of conquest. When cameras first rolled in Hollywood, directors staged epics of Alexander's life, casting grand marble sets and sweeping scores to evoke stolen crowns and fatherless heirs. In corporate think tanks of the late 20th century, strategists mapped succession crises on whiteboards, charting the fall of Enron and Lehman alongside the fall of Mas, and writing of the strange solace found in stones that witnessed both ambition and sorrow. And the diabolical often merge in the cracks between ambition and hubris. Digital archaeologists now comb satellite imagery for traces of lost Hellenistic cities, learning that decay follows conquest as surely as vultures follow the hunt. Noting that no campaign matches the allure of slicing the heart from an empire with a single move. Gamers relished the power only once real. Kings understood. In Silicon Valley boardrooms, startup founders invoke Alexander's daring pivot, seizing markets like he seized cities. On sports fields around the globe, coaches speak of the Macedonian mindset: discipline, unity, relentless offense. In jazz clubs of New Orleans, musicians improvise around motifs titled "Dagger in the Dark," riffing on notes that rise and fall like a conspirator's heartbeat. Space agencies Chryson probes Ija and Pausanias, nodding to the duality of exploration and peril. Virtual influencers on social platforms dramatize palace intrigue, scripting meaning. In climate summits, negotiators refer to the Macedonian deadline, the window before alliances, fracture under competing interests. When biotech firms engineer CRISPR edits, ethicists call upon the ghost of Philip's murder, arguing that altering a single gene can